All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to the next reading of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So, where we left off last time is that Victor Frankenstein met his monster and agreed to create a companion for him because his monster said, I'm always going to be alone and I don't want to be alone. And you deserve to basically make me this monster, this creature who's going to be just as ugly and grotesque as I will, and she will just love me and it'll all work out. So that's kind of how the monsters think about the whole situation. And then Victor, on the other hand, is still kind of stressed out because he doesn't want to make another monster. I mean, he couldn't even handle the fact that he had his first monster, his first creation. And really, I'm calling his creation a monster because Victor sees his creation as a monstrosity, an abomination, something so abhorrent he can't handle it. So, what ends up happening is Victor decides, okay, I'm going to go and travel to England. I'm going to learn a couple things. And then I'm going to go to Scotland and I'm just going to sequester myself away from everybody. And I'm going to develop the ideas and the methodologies and the things needed to create the companion for his first creation. So that's kind of where he is now and kind of what's going on. So he's in Scotland, he's in a remote village. There's only like 5 people that live there, and he has a place all to himself. And chances are the monster followed him, so we may be seeing a bit of the monster talking and asking and saying what he needs, and that's kind of what we're looking at. But anyway, here we go. We're getting so close to finishing. Chapter 20. I sat one evening in my laboratory. The sun had set and the moon was just rising from the sea. I had not sufficient light for my employment, and I remained idle, in a pause of consideration of whether I should leave my labor for the night or hasten its conclusion by unremitting attention to it. As I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me, which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner, and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart, and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. It was now about to form another being, of whose disposition I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate, and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in the deserts, but she had not, and she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with the compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She also might turn from disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated among the earth, who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. Had I right, for my own benefit, to inflict this curse upon the everlasting generations? I had before been moved by the sophisms of being. I had satisfied and extinguished his malice. The prospect did not move me to fear, yet when I thought of my beloved Elizabeth, of her tears and endless sorrow, when she should find her lover so barbarously snatched from her, tears, the first I had shed for many months, streamed from my eyes, and I resolved not to fall before my enemy without a bitter struggle. The night passed away, and the sun rose from the ocean. My feelings became calmer, if it may be called calmness. When the violence of rage sinks into the depths of despair, I felt the house, the horrid scene of last night's contentment, and walked on the beach of the sea, which I almost regarded as an insurmountable barrier between me and my fellow creatures. Nay, a wish that such should prove the fact stole across me. I desired that I might pass my life on that barren rock, wearily it is true, but uninterrupted by any sudden shock of misery. If I returned, it was to be sacrificed, or to see those whom I loved die under the grasp of a demon whom I myself had created. I walked about the isle like a restless spectre, separated from all it loved and miserable in separation. When it became noon and the sun rose higher, I lay down on the grass and was overpowered by a deep sleep. I had been awake the whole of the preceding night. My nerves were agitated and my eyes inflamed by watching and misery. The sleep into which I now sank refreshed me, and when I awoke, I again felt as if I belonged to a human race of beings like myself, and I began to reflect what had passed with greater composure. Yet still the words of the fiend rung in my ears like a death knell. They appeared like a dream, yet distinct and oppressive as a reality. The sun had far descended, and I still sat on the shore, satisfying my appetite, which had become ravenous, with an oaten cake, when I saw a fishing boat land close to me, and one of the men brought me a packet. It contained letters from Geneva, and one from Clerval, entreating me to join him. He said that he was wearing away his time fruitlessly where he was. The letters from the friends he had formed in London desired his return to complete the negotiation they had entered into for his Indian enterprise. He could not any longer delay his departure, but as his journey to London might be followed even sooner than he now conjectured by his own longer voyage, he entreated me to bestow as much of my society on him as I could spare. He besought me, therefore, to leave my solitary isle and to meet him at Perth, what we might proceed southwards together. This letter, in a degree, recalled to me life, and I determined to quit my island at the expiration of 2 days. Yet, before I departed, there was a task to perform, on which I shuddered to reflect. I must pack up my chemical instruments, and for that purpose I must enter the room which had been the scene of my odious work, and I must handle those utensils, the sight of which was sickening to me. The next morning at daybreak, I summoned sufficient courage and unlocked the door of my laboratory. The remains of the half-finished creature, whom I had destroyed, lay scattered on the floor, and I almost felt as if I had mangled the living flesh of a human being. I paused to collect myself, and then entered the chamber. With trembling hand I conveyed the instruments out of the room, but I reflected that I ought not to leave the relics of my work to excite the horror and the suspicion of the peasants, and I accordingly put them into a basket, and with great quantity of stones, and laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea that very night. And in the meantime I sat upon the beach, employed in cleaning and arranging my chemical apparatus. Nothing could be more complete than the alteration that had already taken place in my feelings since the night of the appearance of the demon. I had before regarded my promise with a gloomy despair, as a thing that, with whatever consequences, must be fulfilled. But I now felt as if a film had been taken from before my eyes, and that I, for the first time, now saw clearly. The idea of renewing my labors did not for one instant occur to me. Saw clearly. The idea of renewing my labors did not for one instant occur to me. The threat I had heard weighed on my thoughts, but I did not reflect that a voluntary act of mine could avert it. I had resolved to my own mind that to create another like the fiend I had first made would be an act of basest and most atrocious selfishness, and I banished it from my mind, every thought that could lead to a different conclusion. Before 2 and 3 in the morning the moon rose, And then I, putting my basket aboard a little skiff, sailed out about 4 miles from the shore. The scene was perfectly solitary. A few boats were returning towards land, but I sailed away from them. I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime, and avoided with shuddering anxiety my encounter with my fellow creatures. At one time the moon, which had before been clear, was suddenly overspread by a thick cloud, and I took advantage of the moment of darkness and cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sunk, and then sailed away from the spot. The sky became clouded, but the air was pure, although chilled by the northeast breeze that was then rising. But it refreshed me, and filled me with such agreeable sensations that I resolved to prolong my stay on the water, and fixing the rudder in a direct position, stretched myself at the bottom of the boat. Clouds hid the moon, everything was obscure, and I heard only the sound of the boat, as its keel cut through the waves. The murmur lulled me, and in a short time I slept soundly. I do not know how long I remained in this situation, but when I awoke, I found that the sun had already mounted considerably. The wind was high, and the waves continually threatened the safety of my little skiff. I found that the wind was a northeast wind, and it must have driven me far from the coast from which I had embarked. I endeavored to change my course, but quickly found that if I again made the attempt, the boat would be instantly filled with water. Thus situated, my only resource was to drive before the wind. Confess that I felt a few sensations of terror. I had no compass with me, and was so slenderly acquainted with the geography of this part of the world that the sun was of little benefit to me. I might be driven into the wide Atlantic, and feel all the tortures of starvation, or be swallowed up by the immeasurable waters that roared and buffeted around me. I had already been out many hours, and felt the moment of a burning thirst, a prelude to only other sufferings. I looked on the heavens, which were covered by clouds that flew before the wind, only to be replaced by others. I looked upon the sea, and it was to be my grave. "Fiend!" I exclaimed, "your task is already fulfilled." I thought of Elizabeth, of my father, and of Clerval, all left behind, on whom the monster might satisfy his sanguinary and merciless passions. This idea plunged me into a reverie, so despairing and frightful, that even now, when the scene is on the point of closing before me forever, I shudder to reflect on it. Some hours passed thus, but by degrees, as the sun declined towards the horizon, the wind died away to a gentle breeze, and the sea became free from breakers. But these gave place to a heavy swell. I felt sick and hardly able to hold the rudder, when suddenly I saw a line of high land towards the south. Almost spent as I was by fatigue and dreadful suspense, I endured for several hours. The sudden certainty of life rushed like a flood of warm joy to my heart, and tears gushed from my eyes. How mutable are our feelings, and how strange it is that clinging love we have of life, even in the excess of misery. I constructed another sail with a part of my dress, and eagerly steered my course towards the land. It had a wild and rocky appearance, but as I approached nearer, I easily perceived the traces of cultivation. I saw vessels near the shore, and found myself suddenly transported back to the neighborhood of civilized man. I carefully traced the windings of the land, and hailed a steeple which I at length saw issuing from behind a small promontory. As I was in a state of extreme debility, I resolved to sail directly towards the town, as a place where I could almost easily procure nourishment. Fortunately, I had money with me. As I turned the promontory, I perceived a small, neat town with a good harbor, which I entered, my heart bounding with joy at my unexpected escape. As I occupied in fixing the boat and arranging the sails, Several people crowded towards the spot. They seemed much surprised at my appearance, but instead of offering me any assistance, whispered together with gestures that I merely remarked as they spoke English, and I therefore addressed them in that language. "My good friends," I say, "will you be so kind as to tell me the name of this town and inform me where I am?" "Aye, you will know that soon enough," replied a man with a hoarse voice. "May ye be come to a place that will not prove much to your taste, but you will not be consulted as to your quarters, I promise ye." I was exceedingly surprised on receiving so rude an answer from a stranger. I also was disconcerted on perceiving the frowning and angry countenances of his companions. "Why did you answer me so roughly?" I replied. "Surely it is not the custom of an Englishman to receive strangers so inhospitably." "I do not know," said the man, "what is the custom of the English may be, but it is the custom of the Irish to hate villains." While this strange dialogue continued, I perceived the crowd rapidly. They began to increase. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and anger, which annoyed and in some degree alarmed me. I inquired the way to the inn, but no one replied. Then I moved forward, and a murmuring sound arose from the crowd as they followed and surrounded me, when an ill-looking man approached, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Come ye, sir. You are to follow me to Kerwin's to give an account of yourself." "Who is Mr. Kerwin? Why am I to give an account of myself? Is this not a free country?" "Aye, sir, free enough for honest folk. Mr. Kerwin is a magistrate, and you are to give an account of the death of the gentleman who was found murdered here last night." This answer startled me, but I presently recovered myself. I was innocent and could easily be proved. Accordingly, I followed my conductor in silence and was led to one of the best houses in town. I was all ready to sink from fatigue and hunger, but being surrounded by a crowd, I thought it political to rouse them all my strength, that no physical debility might be construed into apprehension or to overwhelm me, and extinguish in horror and despair all fear of ignominy or death. I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to recall the memory of the frightful events which I am now about to relate in proper detail to my recollection. Oh. Sorry, for some reason my eyes were like watering there. Chapter 21. I was soon introduced to the presence of the magistrate, an old benevolent man with calm and mild manners. He looked upon me, however, with some degree of severity, and then, turning towards my conductors, he asked who appeared as witnesses on this occasion. About half a dozen men came forward, and one being selected by the magistrate, he deposed that he had been out fishing the night before with his son and brother-in-law, Daniel Nugent, when, about 10 o'clock, they observed a strong northerly blast rising, and they accordingly put in for port. It was a very dark night, as the moon had not yet risen. They did not land at the harbor, but as they had been accustomed, at a creek about 2 miles below. He walked on first, carrying a part of the fishing tackle, and his companions followed him at some distance. As he was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something and fell at his length on the ground. His companions came up to assist him, and by the light of their lantern they found that he had fallen on the body of a man, who was all to appearance to be dead. Their first supposition was that it was the corpse of some person who had been drowned, and was thrown on the shore by the waves. But on examination they found that the clothes were not wet, and even that the body was not that cold. They instantly carried it to the cottage of an old woman near the spot, and endeavored, but in vain, to restore it to life. It appeared to be a handsome young man, about 25 years of age. He had appeared to have been strangled, for there was no sign of any violence except the black mark of fingers on his neck. The first part of this deposition did not in the least interest me, but when the mark of the fingers was mentioned, I remembered the murder of my brother, and felt myself extremely agitated. My limbs trembled, and a mist overcame my eyes, which obliged me to lean on a chair for support. The magistrate observed me with a keen eye, and of course drew an unfavorable augury from my manner. The son confirmed his father's account, but when Daniel Nugent was called, he swore positively that just before the fall of his companion, he saw a boat with a single man in it, at a short distance from the shore, and as far as he could judge by the light of a few stars, it was the same boat in which I had just landed. A woman deposed that she lived near the beach, and was standing at the door of her cottage, waiting for the return of the fisherman. But about an hour before she heard the discovery of the body, when she saw a boat with only one man in it push off from the part of the shore where the corpse was afterwards found. Another woman confirmed the account of the fisherman, having brought the body into her house. It was not cold. They put it into a bed and rubbed it, and Daniel went down to town for the apothecary. But life was quite gone. Several other men were examined concerning by landing, and they agreed that, with the strong north wind that had arisen during the night, it was very nearly probable that I had been beaten about for many hours, and had been obliged to return to the same spot which I had departed. Besides, they observed that it appeared that I had brought the body from another place, and it was likely that I did not appear to know the shore. I might have been put into the harbor ignorant of the distance of the town from the place of which I had deposited the corpse. Mr. Kerwin, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into the room where the body lay for an interment, that it might be observed what effect the sight it would produce upon me. The idea was probably suggested by the extreme agitation I had exhibited when the mode of the murder had been described. I was accordingly conducted by the magistrate and several other persons to the inn. I could not help being struck by the strange coincidences that had taken place during this eventful night, but knowing that I had been conversing with several persons on the island I inhabited about the time that the body had been found, I was perfectly tranquil to the consequences of the affair. I entered the room where the corpse lay, and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on beholding it? I yet felt parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering and agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and the witnesses, passed like a dream from my memory. When I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me, I gasped for breath, and throwing myself on the body, I exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henry, of life? Too, I have already destroyed. Other victims await their destiny, but not you, Clerval, not my friend, my benefactor." The human frame could no longer support the agonies that I endured, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. A fever succeeded to this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. My ravings, as I was afterwards heard, were more frightful. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by whom I was tormented, and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasping my neck, and screamed aloud with agony and terror. Fortunately, as I spoke my native language, Mr. Kerwin alone understood me, but my gestures and bitter cries were sufficient to affright the other witnesses. Why did I not die? More miserable than man ever was before, why did I not sink into the forgetfulness and rest? Death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope, and the next a prey for the worms and the decay of the tomb? Of what materials was I made, that I could thus resist so many shocks, which, like the turning of the wheel, continued renewed torture? But I was doomed to live, and in 2 months found myself as awaking from a dream, in a prison, stretched on a wretched bed, surrounded by gaolers, turnkeys, bolts, and all the miserable apparatus of a dungeon. It was morning, I remember, when I woke to the understanding. I had forgotten the particulars of what had happened, and only felt as if some great misfortune had suddenly overwhelmed me. But when I looked around and saw the barred windows and the squalidness of the room in which I was, all flashed across my memory, and I groaned bitterly. This sound disturbed an old woman who was sleeping in a chair beside me. She was a hired nurse, the wife of one of the turnkeys, and her countenance expressed all those bad qualities which often characterized that class. The lines of her face were hard and rude, like that of a person accustomed to see without sympathizing in sights of misery. Her tone expressed her entire indifference. She addressed me in English, and the voice struck me as one that I had heard during my sufferings. "Are ye better now, sir?" she said. I replied in the same language with a feeble force. "I am, I believe, but it will be true. If indeed I did not dream, I am sorry that I am still alive, to feel this misery and horror." "Aye, for that matter," said the woman. "If ye mean about the gentleman ye murdered, I believe that it were better for you if you were dead, and I fancy it go will hard with you indeed. However, that's none of my business. I am sent to nurse you and get ye well. I do me duty with a safe conscience. It were well if everybody did the same." I turned with loathing from the woman, who could utter so unfeeling a speech to a person just saved, on the very edge of death. But I feel languid and unable to reflect on all that had passed. The whole series of my life appeared to me as a dream. It sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. As the images that floated before me became more distinct, I grew feverish. A darkness pressed around me. No one who was near me soothed me with the gentle voice of love. No dear hand supported me. The physician came and prescribed medicines, and the old woman prepared them for me. But utter carelessness was visible in the first, and the expression of brutality was strongly marked in the visage of the second. Who could be interested in the fate of a murderer, but the hangman who would gain his fee? These were my first reflections, but I soon learned that Mr. Kerwin had shown me extreme kindness. He had caused the best room in the prison to be prepared for me. Wretched, indeed, it was the best, and it was he who had provided a physician and a nurse. It is true, he seldom came to see me, for although he ardently desired to relieve the sufferings of every human creature, he did not wish to be present at the agonies and the miserable ravings of a murderer. He came, therefore, sometimes to see that I was not neglected, but his visits were short, with long intervals. One day, while I was gradually recovering, I was seated in a chair, my eyes half open, and my cheeks livid like those in death. I was overcome by gloom and misery, and often reflected that I had better seek death than desire to remain in a world which to me was replete with wretchedness. At one time I considered whether I should not declare myself guilty and suffer the penalty of law, less innocent than poor Justine had been. Such were my thoughts when the door of my apartment was opened and Mr. Kerwin entered. His countenance expressed sympathy and compassion. He drew a chair close to mine and addressed me in French. I hear that this place is very shocking to you. Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? I thank you, but all that you mention is nothing to me. On the whole earth there is no comfort for which I am capable of receiving. I know that sympathy of a stranger can be a little bit of a relief to one borne down as so you have been by such a strange misfortune. But you will, I hope, soon quit this melancholy abode, for doubtless evidence can easily be brought to free you from the criminal charge. That is at least my concern. I am, by a course of strange events, become the most miserable of mortals. Persecuted and tortured as I am and have been, can death be my evil to me? Nothing indeed could be more unfortunate and agonizing than the strange chances that have lately occurred. You were thrown by some surprising accident on this shore, renowned for its hospitality, seized immediately and charged with murder. The first sight that was presented to your eyes was the body of your friend, murdered is so in an uncountable manner, and placed as it were by some fiend across your path. As Mr. Kerwin said this, notwithstanding the agitation I endured on this retrospect of my sufferings, I also felt considerable surprise at the knowledge he seemed to possess concerning me. I suppose some astonishment was exhibited in my countenance, for Mr. Kerwin hastened to say, "Immediately upon your being taken ill, all the papers that were on your person were brought to me, and I examined them, and I might discover some trace by which I could send to your relations on account of your misfortune and illness that you are having. I found several letters, and among them one which I discovered from its commencement from your father. I instantly wrote to Geneva. Nearly 2 months have elapsed since the departure of my letter, but you are ill. Even now you tremble. You are unfit for agitation of any kind. The suspense is 1,000 times worse than the most horrible event. Tell me what the new scene of death has been acted, and those whose murder I am now to lament." "Your family is perfectly well," said Mr. Kerwin with gentleness. "And someone, a friend, is come to visit you." I know not by what chain of thought the idea presented itself, but it instantly darted into my mind that the murderer had come to knock at my misery and taunt me with the death of Clerval, as a new incitement for me to comply with his hellish desires. I put my hands before my eyes and cried out in agony, "Oh, take him away! I cannot see him. For God's sake, do not let him enter." Mr. Kerwin regarded me with a troubled countenance. He could not help regarding my exclamation as a presumption of my guilt, and said, in a rather severe tone, "I should have thought, young man, that the presence of your father would have been welcome instead of inspiring such violent repugnance." "My father?" I cried, while every feature and every muscle was relaxed from anguish to pleasure. "Is my father indeed come? How kind, how very kind! But where is he? Why does he not hasten to me?" My change of manner surprised and pleased the magistrate. Perhaps he thought that my former exclamation was a momentary return of delirium, and now he instantly resumed his former benevolence. He rose and quitted the room with my nurse, and in a moment my father entered it. Nothing at this moment could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father. I stretched out my hand to him and cried, "Are you then safe, and Elizabeth and Ernest?" My father calmed me with assurances of their welfare, and endeavored, by dwelling on these subjects so interesting to my heart, to raise my desponding spirits, but he soon felt that a prison cannot be the abode of cheerfulness. "What a place this is that you inhabit, my son," he said, looking mournfully at the barred windows and wretched appearance of the room. "You travel to seek happiness, but a fatality seems to pursue you, and poor Clerval." The name of my unfortunate and murdered friend was an agitation too great to be endured in my weak state. I shed tears. "Alas! Yes, my father," I replied. "Some destiny of the most horrible kind hangs over me, and I must live to fulfill it, or surely I should have died on the coffin of Henry." We were not allowed to converse for any length of time, for the precarious state of my health rendered every precaution necessary that could ensure tranquillity. Mr. Kerwin came in and insisted that my strength should not be exhausted by too much exertion. But the appearance of my father was to me like that of a good angel, and I gradually recovered my health. As my sickness quitted me, I was absorbed by the gloomy and black melancholy that nothing could dissipate. The image of Clerval was before me, ghastly and murdered. More than once the agitation into which these reflections threw me made my friends dread a dangerous relapse. Alas, why did they preserve so miserably and detested a life? It was surely that I might fulfill my destiny, which was now drawing soon to a close. Oh, so soon, so very soon, will death extinguish these throbbings and relieve me from the mighty weight of anguish that bears me into the dust, and, in executing the award of Justine, I shall also sink to rest. Then the appearance of death was distant, although the wish was ever present to me. My thoughts, and I often sat hours of motionless and speechless, wishing for some mighty revolution that might bury me and my destroyer in its ruins. The season of the assizes approached, and I had already been 3 months in prison, and although I was still weak and in continual danger of relapse, I was obliged to travel nearly 100 miles to the country town where the court was held. Mr. Kerwin charged himself with every care of collecting witnesses and arranging my defense. I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides on life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the hour of the body of my friend was found, and on a fortnight after my removal I was liberated from prison. My father was enraptured on finding me freed from the vexations of a criminal charge, that I was again allowed to breathe the fresh atmosphere and permitted to return to my native country. I did not participate in these feelings, for to me the walls of the dungeon or palace were alike hateful. The cup of life was poisoned forever, and although the sun shone upon me as the happy, gay, and of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of 2 eyes that glared upon me. Sometimes they were expressive eyes of Henry, languishing in death, the dark orbs nearly covered by the lids, and the long black lashes that fringed them. Sometimes it was the watery, clouded eyes of the monster, as I first saw them in my chamber in Ingolstadt. My father tried to awaken in me the feelings of affection. He talked of Geneva, which I should soon visit, of Elizabeth and Ernest, but these words only drew deep groans from me. Sometimes, indeed, I felt a wish for happiness, and thought with a melancholy delight of my beloved cousin, or longed with a devouring maladie du pays to see once more the blue lake and the rapid Rhone that had been so dear to me in the early childhood. But my general state of feeling was a torpor, in which a prison was as welcome a residence as the divinest scene in nature, and these fits were seldom interrupted but by paroxysms of anguish and despair. At these moments I often endeavored to put an end to the existence I loathed, and it required unceasing attendance and vigil to restrain me from committing some dreadful act of violence. Yet one duty remained to me, the recollection of which finally triumphed over my selfish despair. It was necessary that I should return without delay to Geneva, there to watch over the lives of those I so fondly loved, and to lie in wait for the murderer, that if any chance led me to the place of his concealment, or if he dared again to blast me by his presence, I might, with an unfailing aim, put an end to the existence of the monstrous image which I had endured, and that the mockery of the soul still more monstrous. My father still desired to delay our departure, fearful that I could not sustain the fatigues of a journey. For I was a shattered wreck, the shadow of a human being. My strength was gone. I was a mere skeleton, and fever night and day preyed upon my wasted frame. Still, as I urged our leaving Ireland with such inquietude and impatience, my father thought it was best to yield. We took our passage on board of a vessel bound for Hart de Gris, and sailed with a fair wind from the Irish shores. It was midnight. I lay on the deck looking at the stars and listening to the dashing of the waves. I hailed the darkness that shut Ireland from my sight, and my pulse beat with a feverish joy when I reflected that I should soon see Geneva. The past appeared to me in the light of a frightful dream. Yet the vessel in which I was on, that blew me from the detested shore of Ireland, and the sea which surrounded me, told me too forcibly that I was deceived by no vision, and that the Clerval, my friend, my dearest companion, had fallen a victim to me and the monster of my creation. I repassed in my memory my whole life, my quiet happiness while residing with my family in Geneva, the death of my mother, and my departure for Ingolstadt. I remembered shuddering the mad enthusiasm that hurried me onto the creation of my hideous enemy, and I called to mind the night in which he first lived. I was unable to pursue the train of thought. 1,000 feelings pressed upon me, and I wept bitterly. Ever since my recovery from the fever it had been the custom of taking every night a small quantity of laudanum, for it was by means of this drug only that I was enabled to gain the rest necessary for the preservation of life. Oppressed by the recollection of various misfortunes, I now swallowed double my usual quantity, and soon slept profoundly. But sleep did not afford me respite from the thought and misery. My dreams presented 1,000 objects that scared me. Towards morning I was possessed by a kind of nightmare. I felt the fiend's grasp in my neck, and could not free myself from it. Groans and cries rung in my ears. My father, who was watching over me, perceived my restlessness and awoke me. The dashing waves were around, the cloudy sky above. The fiend was not here. A sense of security, a feeling that a truce was established between the present hour and the irresistible, disastrous future, imparted to me a kind of calm forgetfulness, of which the human mind is by its structure peculiarly susceptible. So, I'm going to see how long this next chapter is. Ooh, she's pretty long. So I think I'm going to save our next chapter, chapter 22, for tomorrow. So I will be streaming again at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you liked listening to me and kind of hearing a little bit about the story of Frankenstein, feel free to like, subscribe, or follow. I do stream regularly, and I do stream every day. So that way when you do subscribe to me or follow or like me, it gives you the opportunity to get notifications when I go live. So That way you can be alerted. And yeah, with that, I hope to see you guys tomorrow, and I hope you all stay safe and stay geeky as always.